Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all, Canada's most irreverent talk show on this Wednesday, July 24th. Hope you're doing well. It is just after 1 o'clock Eastern time where I am in beautiful southwestern Ontario, but wherever you are, I haven't actually been outside today, I realize, so it may or may not be beautiful, but it's not flooding like it was that early last week and certainly in Toronto, so it is all relative in that sense. But anyway, hope wherever you are in this lovely country or world, you're having a great day, whether you're listening live or catching this in a time capsule in the year 2075. We welcome you very much, and I hope the world is a little bit less chaotic than it is today. But anyway, I want to talk about a few different things here. We're going to get into gas prices with I'm going to definitely the country's leading authority, maybe even the world's leading authority on gas prices, Dan McTeague. That is going to be coming up in just about 15 minutes or so. Also, later on in the program, why free trade is a bit of a misnomer when you don't even have free trade in your own country. You can't take a case of beer from one province to another. And these barriers are coming with a huge cost, about $200 billion a year. That's going to be something we tackle later on in the program. But I want to begin by discussing this interview. I mentioned it yesterday because it had just sort of emerged that it had happened as I was coming on air. And it was an interview that was not planned, that is very unlikely on the surface, between Keean Bexte of the Counter Signal. Now, he used to work for Rebel. Now he's started his own outlet. And Justin Trudeau. And the interview took place where, basically the only place you can get interview access to Justin Trudeau, which is a beach in Tofino, British Columbia. Now, there are a few moving parts to this. Number one, Justin Trudeau is on vacation. He decided to take 10 days off until the end of the month with his family. I don't know if it's just his kids and him. I don't know if Sophie is there as well. But either way, it's a family vacation. He is on the beach in Tofino. He loves Tofino, goes there all the time. And this is where Keean Bexte and one of his colleagues, who goes by Cat Canada on Twitter, she was, I believe, the camera operator at the time. Now, why I want to talk about this is because this has become a bit of a flashpoint here online. You have some people, not just Trudeau defenders, even some people on the right, saying this is in poor form. It's not fair to ambush someone when they're on vacation. You shouldn't invade someone's private space. There's a time and a place for this and so on. And then you have a whole other subset if you go like way, way, way deep into the rabbit hole. I should have pulled some sample tweets, but it's not hard to find. You get people that believe this was a setup, this was a plant. Justin Trudeau and Keean Bexte were supposedly in cahoots, and they had planned this as some weird psyop that was endeavoring to humanize Justin Trudeau. And I can go through and basically dismantle point by point why it is not a setup. I've known Keean for many, many years. I can tell you he is not on the Liberal government's payroll. All of the theories that have come up for how he got close or how did he get past security, these are people that know nothing about Canadian security. They know nothing. I have shaken Justin Trudeau's hand more times than I can count. This is not something that is difficult to do in Canada, especially if someone is outside of a structured environment, if they think they're just walking along a beach. Now, I would say that the relatively lax security in this country around political leaders is a feature and not a bug. It's because we live in a country in which leaders are not and do not feel threatened generally. Now, I'm assuming a time will come when that will change, but don't take the absence of Keean being tackled by police as evidence that he had been given permission to get close to Justin Trudeau. That being said, once he did get there, and Justin Trudeau did have RCMP kind of performing a protective bubble around him, he did wave them off. And you're going to see this in the clip that I'm going to share in a couple of moments. But the reason I'm wanting to give it a bit of context here is just so you know what the two debates are that are taking place about this. Number one, this was a setup. It was staged. Number two, okay, maybe it wasn't a setup and it wasn't staged, but it was unfair. He shouldn't have done it. It's not civil. It's not polite. Okay, now that we have those arguments, I've got thoughts on both of those, but let's just roll a bit of the clip. Now, this is a 13-minute video that the Counter Signal has posted. This is an excerpt that shows, I think, the general tone and tenor of what happened.
You enjoying your time on vacation? Good. You having a good time on vacation, sir?
I'm happy to speak with you because actually this is the first time we've been able to speak with you because your government is so That's what I'm saying. That's enough. Okay? We want to know why you can justify going on a chartered government flight when your minister says that going on a simple road trip.
The line is right here.
Sure.
Why don't you walk with me?
Sure. Thank you.
I'll be with you in a bit.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So tell me.
I just want to
Hang on,
know. I ask the questions.
No, you asked
me one
about your
question.
mom.
I'll ask
You
you
asked about your mom. Okay, sure. Do you think Prime Minister should be able to have a family life?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you imagine?
I didn't ask one question.
You've
You
asked
asked one
multiple
question.
questions.
You haven't
I'm gonna
answered
ask
one though.
more.
So
I'm going to ask one more.
families get.
Do you
Prime ministers
think-
get to have a family
do you
life.
think-
Journalists also get to have
do you
access to
think-
prime ministers.
I have. Okay. So what's your question?
Well, I want to know if you're hiding from your caucus, why you won't call a caucus meeting.
I am not hiding from my caucus, and I've had many, many conversations and meetings with caucus. Okay, question for you now. Can you imagine, and do you think that kids who grow up in a prime minister's family deserve to have a normal-ish life with their family?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And can you understand?
Can I answer the question now?
Sure, go ahead.
So you are passing a bill right now. You're pushing through a bill that's it's called the Online Harms Act, and you're sort of putting a bunch of policy in behind protecting children. You say it's all about protecting children, but that bill is actually going to censor Canadians' ability to access the internet, to exercise free speech. Why put those two bills together? Why not separate them?
Right? First of all, it's actually not doing any censoring of the internet, and it's entirely focused on protecting kids.
So it goes on. It's about a 10-minute walk and talk, which is a type of interview, and it's not a level of access or a length of interview that any independent journalist that I'm aware of has ever had with Justin Trudeau. And Keean Bexte only got that because he went to Tofino and went to where he assumed Justin Trudeau was going to be, and that was that. Now, I'm going to just... There's so much to unpack in this, oddly enough. And one of the reasons I wanted to share that clip with you is because Justin Trudeau has been protected from Keean. The police have come in. They're putting a barrier. They know they can get him. I don't know how far he is from shelter or a building, but they know that they can basically keep Keean away from him. And Justin Trudeau says, no, let's take a walk. Now, I think what he was doing there, it sounds like, was actually just trying to go away from his son. He was also, I suspect, realizing, okay, maybe there's a way that I can flip the script on this and turn this around, because everyone has seen videos of some independent journalists filming Justin Trudeau walking alongside him. He ignores them. That's that. He's doing something different here. And what he does is he walks right over to Keean and says, all right, I'll take your questions, but I get to ask you questions too. And after a little bit of awkwardness at the beginning, they seem to accept the terms of this. Keean asks questions about the Online Harms Act, about Liberals caucus management, about whether Justin Trudeau is going to step down before the next election. Justin Trudeau focuses on family, about having a private life, having a family life, about whether it's fair to not let people have that. And they talk about how much Justin Trudeau works and how much time he takes off him. It was actually, in some ways, a more insightful interview. And then, well, not in some ways, in many ways, it was a more insightful interview than you get from most other places with Justin Trudeau, certainly now. So it was not staged. It was not set up. There is no evidence to support that. And the only evidence is just people saying they don't think Keean would get that close to him. That's really the only theory that the only evidence or speculation that people who believe in the, undercover Liberal operative Keean Bexte theory seem to have. But the reason I want to talk about this so much is because what Trudeau has done is very masterful. I'll give him credit for it. He took this moment, turned it around, took control of the conversation, and in the end, both got their shots, for lack of a better term, in on the other. And the reason that I believe that what Keean did was justifiable was because Justin Trudeau has made it impossible for independent journalists to access him in any official fora. I have tried to cover the Liberal caucus meeting, even when it was in my own city. That was about a year ago. It was not accredited. The most I would be allowed to do is stand on the sidewalk outside the venue and hope someone walked by. The PMO will not even respond to media requests that I send. So if we're writing a story about Justin Trudeau at True North, we do what journalists are supposed to do. We reach out to the Prime Minister's office and give them an opportunity to comment. And they do not respond. They ignore us entirely. When Justin Trudeau has press conferences, no matter where in the country they are, if you reach out and you're with True North, or I presume Counter Signal, and you say, I want to attend as a journalist, like every other journalist, they will not respond. They will not even give you the location of these press conferences. So when you shut off official channels of access, which we realize in a democracy are incredibly important. Press freedom is incredibly important. Press must have access to political leaders. It doesn't mean unfettered access. It doesn't mean every day. It doesn't mean everyone gets a one-on-one interview, but there should be some level of access. When you shut that off, you force journalists to get creative. And this is journalism 101, by the way. When you're trying to reach someone for comment and you can't reach them, you have to start everything. You call them, you email them, and yes, you even go knock on their door because it is that important to make sure you're giving them an opportunity to respond. So this is the equivalent of Keean Bexte, in a less obtrusive way, I'd say, going and knocking on Justin Trudeau's door. And he ends up having a great interview out of it. Does it reveal anything in the way of breaking news? Maybe, maybe not. That's for you to decide. But it reveals a lot about the way Justin Trudeau is operating. And look, I'll say again, when he's on, he's on. It was hard to believe that that guy was the same guy that struggles to describe a water bottle in some press conferences. But he actually managed to, in that moment, just kick into gear and realize what he needed to do to try to diffuse the situation. And this is what it's supposed to be about. That's what democracy is supposed to be about. That's what the interplay between journalists and politicians is supposed to be about. It's not about one convincing the other. It's just about the two sides realizing that they have very different constituencies and engaging in some form of a conversation. But I go back to all of this pearl clutching that we see from people that are so mortified, so offended that Keean went to track Justin Trudeau down on the beach. Look, if Justin Trudeau had been at a restaurant table with his kids, I would have been very uncomfortable with that. If he had been really close to his kids, and I at first when I saw that, I didn't think his son was anywhere near. Later on in the interview, Trudeau mentions that his son was out swimming and he was going to visit him. So I think it's possible that when Keean made the approach, he thought he was just alone, but was on his way to see his son. So I don't know the details on that, but I understand the discomfort with that. I once, when in the 2019 election campaign, was banned from covering Liberal press conferences. So we were just going around the country on our own because we couldn't be on the Liberal campaign plane. And we were trying to get access to Justin Trudeau to ask a couple of questions. And there was one moment we were in Montreal, and I was about to approach Justin Trudeau. I was at a table in a hotel lobby, and I got up and I just took one step forward, and I realized he was surrounded by his kids. And I took a step back because that was not something that I wanted to do, and I knew there'd be another opportunity later in the day. That was a line that I drew. But when you are in the field, you have to make these snap judgments. And, I don't begrudge anyone, a mistake or two, but I'm not convinced a mistake was made here. Because Justin Trudeau has invited this treatment from the media. He has invited this treatment from the media by treating the media with such contempt. Again, Keean was one of the journalists who, at the time with Rebel News, needed to sue to get into the Leaders Debates Commission's debates in 2019. True North was there as well. We were banned by a government agency from doing our job as journalists. And every day, despite that, the Liberals still have the same attitude towards independent journalists, the same attitude that prevents them from doing their work. So, look, maybe you don't like Keean, maybe you don't like the idea of what some people are characterizing as an ambush, but Justin Trudeau is reaping what he has spent the last several years sowing. And that is where I think, again, the pearl clutching is a great way of doing this. Chris Selly had a point. He was with the National Post. He said, if Justin Trudeau doesn't like the job that much, he's the prime minister of a G7 country. If he doesn't like people asking him questions, then he can just quit already and move on. But the thing that is so fascinating is that when you look at these mechanisms that are in place that tend to block access, these mechanisms in place that tend to prevent people from being able to ask a question to Justin Trudeau. It's because his staff doesn't have confidence in him. It's because his staff is not convinced that he could do the Pierre Poilievre thing and turn around an interaction with a journalist in a way like that. Now, I'd say that this exchange with Keean shows that he can at times do it. He can at times flip the script, take charge, or at least take a level of control of a conversation and end up doing it. But it's not about what looks good for him. It's not about whether he's capable or not. The whole point is that it took Keean Bexte several thousands of dollars for him and his videographer to get on planes, go to Tofino, he posted like a screenshot of his credit card bill or whatever to, get on one of those Harbor Air float planes to go to the beach. And I don't know how long they were waiting. I joked yesterday that finding Trudeau is kind of easy. You just sort of look on the beach and there he is. But I don't know if they were walking up and down the beach for 8 hours. I don't know how long it took for them to do it, but I do know that they did it. And they did it well. And I would suspect that if Keean were allowed to go to Trudeau press conferences, he wouldn't have had to do that because it simply would not be worth it. It simply would not be worth it. And you'd already have that access. And that's where I find this to be just such a profoundly dismal state of affairs. I've told the story often of when Chrystia Freeland, who was at the time the Foreign Affairs Minister, she was co-hosting this so-called Global Conference for Media Freedom in London, England. I was there covering it, and she was having a press conference, and at the Media Freedom press conference, decided to ban me, to ban True North from attending it, also Sheila Gunn-Reid as well. And it was just by a fluke that all of the other journalists there were really minded to support press freedom, and they said, well, Freeland, we're not going to go to your press conference unless you let everyone in. That solidarity doesn't happen on a normal basis. That solidarity doesn't happen in the case of what Keean Bexte and others are dealing with. So all of that is to say, I am not troubled by this in light of that context. I do believe generally that we should let politicians have a personal life, no matter how much you may loathe them. I don't like the idea of protesting at people's homes. I don't like the idea of harassing people at home. I don't like the idea of harassing anyone or doing anything of the sort when they're around their family. But asking questions as a journalist on a beach, which is not a place that carries a public an expectation of privacy, when you have no other opportunities to do that, I think is entirely justifiable. That's my position. I'm open to people disagreeing. So if you have other thoughts on it, weigh in the comments. This has been, more people have been talking about like the extraneous aspects of the interview than have been talking about the interview itself on social media. Now, admittedly, that was before the interview was released. But let's talk about one thing we can find a lot more unanimity on among this audience, I suspect, which is the devastating impacts of the carbon tax. One of many, not the only thing driving up the cost of living, but it is in fact doing it. Now, that being said, there is an interesting piece that I wanted to get to on gas prices generally, which is that the Competition Bureau is suspecting there may be a little bit of anti-competitive conduct that is, to use the watchdog's word, guiding gas prices. The Competition Bureau is looking at a company called Calibrate Canada, which they suspect is guiding gas prices at 100 or 1,700 fuel stations across the country. If you want to understand fuel prices, there's only one guy in Canada that knows everything about them, and that is our good friend Dan McTeague, who is the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy and also a former Liberal member of Parliament back when that meant something very different from what it does today. Dan, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Good to be here, Andrew, and thank you for the invitation. Didn't realize gasoline was such a big deal these days. It certainly wasn't with the Competition Bureau 30 years ago when I was after this file, but glad to see that they're on it nevertheless.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think anecdotally everyone would assume there was some sort of a passive collusion going on because, everyone has seen the intersections with 3 gas stations where one drops their price and then, half an hour later the next one does and then half an hour after that the other one does. But what is it they're actually thinking is happening here that may be illegal potentially?
Well, I think they're probably looking at conspiracy, which is that a couple of these gas stations are gathering in the dark of night under dimly lit lamps on some street corner and saying, "Hey, this is the price we're going to be setting for the next several days." They may also be looking at the wholesale price of gasoline, which brings us into the whole ambit of, why are wholesale prices very similar between competitors. This, of course, has always been a concern that you have, 3 or 4 suppliers, Petro-Canada, Imperial being the big players across much of Canada. Of course, there are regional players, Irving and the East Coast, and to the West Coast, Chevron, which is Parkland Refinery in Vancouver. These are smaller players, but they tend to look at the wholesale price of gasoline. They look at the Canadian dollar, and they come up with a formula which basically suggests which way the price is going to go. Now, in some parts of the country, it's usually 48 hours after the price, or 36 hours, I should say, after the price is settled on U.S. markets, we get a wholesale price indication. That doesn't necessarily mean gas stations need to jump on it, but in most major cities across Canada, they do, which, of course, is the reason why I began predicting gas prices well over 30 years ago. At the same time, I was out writing a little report that Lost in Time, report of the Liberal Committee on Gasoline Pricing in Canada. You'll see it's about 26 years old, and yours truly was chair of that. At the time, I was concerned about the loss of competition, particularly among retail gas stations. However, this is always going to continue to be an issue. And we know that gasoline prices tend to be also, diesel prices tend to be, jet fuel prices tend to be home heating oil prices. And so where energy prices go and how they're influenced do with, I think, not just the political direction of this country, but the whole issue of affordability, which is something I've been on for several years, as you can see from above. I have every expectation that the Competition Bureau, of course, is being guided by new mandates. The mandate, of course, would be, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. We want to make sure that there's no greenwashing. That is to say, people making claims that they're doing something clean, quote unquote, anti-fossil fuel, when in fact they're not. And so I think the Bureau itself has now gone from being, a defender, a cop on the beat when it comes to competition, to bringing in and inviting some of the political partisan considerations, including climate change and, of course, all the issues, the many taxes that go with it, Andrew.
How many independent variables are there that are inputs to gas prices in Canada?
Well, you have to watch in Canada, Eastern Canada, so Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and Ontario tends to follow the New York Mercantile Exchange, or the market at New York is where our wholesale price comes from, and that varies by day. So if we're on a day like today where it's up a couple pennies, that could mean a 1 cent increase. A couple pennies a gallon could mean a cent or two increase come 24 hours, 48 hours from now. So we're likely looking at a scenario where that would happen by Friday. Western Canada, so from Thunder Bay, if you can believe it or not, right up to Vancouver's limits. The Lower Mainland is another market, and that's really driven by the Chicago spot market. And of course, we have the Vancouver, Lower Mainland, and Victoria. So Vancouver Island is also influenced by what's called the Pacific Northwest market. And that, of course, means whatever happens in the United States tends to be the price we're going to pay within 48 hours. At least gas stations will be forced to pay. And you have to include in that, of course, the value of the Canadian dollar. Very important to recognize because Andrew, many people tend to overlook in their so-called millions of dollars in federal government subsidies to come up with these studies that surprise, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, tend to support the government's position. They tend to overlook the fact that Canadian dollar continues to sink, and 137 pennies to buy $1 adds about 24 to 27 cents a liter to the price of gasoline. And that's not even including the issue of taxation, not the one, but the 2 carbon taxes that we now have in Canada.
And to go back to the retail aspect of this, how much latitude do gas companies have, pump stations have in their prices when these are going up and down? I know Costco, locally is notoriously good for having a few cents less, but how much of a buffer do they really have to pad that out if they want to undercut their competitors?
Well, you have to look at what's called a retail margin, and you have to look at your market. If you have a lot of people coming through, so what they call throughputs, you have a lot of 20, 30,000 liters a day, and you have several hundred cars coming in, then your margin doesn't have to be as high. It could be 7, 6, 5 cents like a Costco, or you have other ways of cross subsidizing that as Costco would, for instance, with rewards programs, or better yet, you paying $65 a year to have access to their pumps. I can't just walk into their pumps without showing my Costco membership before getting that. So that's a bit of an advantage. Also, the amount of fuel you can use. If you can walk in and say, hey, listen, I can move 1 million liters of gasoline in one given week, or diesel the equivalent, or Supreme, you're going to get the attention of the refiner, because the refinery runs 24/7, 365 days a year. And so those who can move volumes tend to get a little bit of a better discount than, say, Barney's Bait and Tackle and Gasoline Emporium would in an off-site situation where they don't get a lot of traffic. Nevertheless, everyone pays within a few cents the same for wholesale price of gasoline. There are discounts. Costco might get, on a day like today, where they rack price, the so-called wholesale price, say for Regina being $4.9, might be buying it for 99 cents. So they get 5 cents off any competitors in the area because of the large volumes they can move. They still have to have a retail margin in order to cover the cost of honoring credit cards, cost of keeping the plaza open, paying the staff or whoever is there. And that's why, you can't do these things for free. We often see many variations in prices across the country, even within cities, where some gas stations tend to have a lower price than others. They hope that they can attract more to their station by, slightly lower prices. But I think the story here is, and I've said this for some 30 odd years now, is that the real competition is at the retail level, the last 8 or 9 cents a liter. And that's what it comes down to. 8 or 9 cents is all the gas station has control over. And so, if they suddenly remove that after 5 p.m. in a given afternoon and have zero margin, and they're running 7 cents lower than everyone else, obviously they're going to get most of the traffic. And there are many websites, some which I've worked with in the past, Gas Buddy, for instance, which are devoted to letting people know when that happens, how that happens, where the best deals are.
I wanted to, just in the last couple of moments I have with you here, point you to this tweet. Ryan Turnbull, who's a Liberal member of Parliament, had shared this. He says, a new report says Canadian carbon tax did not cause hike in gas prices or inflation. The Conservatives will deny this at all costs. They just can't handle the truth. So I would say, and I think you would agree, that we can't say every increase in gas price has been attributed to the carbon tax, but the design of the carbon tax was to increase gas prices. That was the point of it.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I don't know how the Liberals are saying that there is no connection to increases and the carbon tax.
It makes no sense. And I was member of Parliament for Whitby for several years. I know where Mr. Turnbull is trying to come from. But when you get an organization that you pay 35 or 50 million, 52 million to come up with some kind of weird study that doesn't include some experts who know what the hell they're talking about, i.e. me, you know that there's a problem. And you know that this is, from a political point of view, and I'll put my 18 years as a Liberal member of Parliament hat back on and say, either you do want the carbon taxes to work to deny and to encourage people to, or discourage people from buying fossil fuels, or you don't. And so it's an argument. If he's making the argument that this isn't inflationary, then obviously it's not working, which brings into question Mr. Turnbull and the Liberal Party's attempt at trying to suggest that carbon taxes are indeed useful. In fact, they're extraordinarily expensive. Canadians understand that. Most do not get back what they put in, and we're not just talking about fuel for transportation, but also energy costs, things like keeping your home heated, and the cost generally as it cascades through the economy of all these things. We have a country with 2 carbon taxes, British Columbia being a very good example, where you have 17.61 is the first carbon tax. The second, the Clean Fuel Standard, the BC LCFS, short for BC Low Carbon Fuel Standard, about 18, 19 cents a litre now. And that's going to be surprising. I fought the government over there many years ago on this point when they said there was 12 mystery cents. It's actually about 18 or 19 now. And that's because the cost of a carbon credit, which is about $500, which British Columbia is very transparent about. It's $500 per credit. For every $110 is 4 cents a litre. So that's according to the federal government's own RIAS, or Regulatory Implementation Act study. So for every $110 of carbon credit, which is $500 today in British Columbia, it's 4 cents. 4 cents times you break in 110 into 5 from 500. You're talking 15.8 plus GST. So you're about 18 cents a litre roughly for the second carbon tax. That's what's adding to the cost of living. More importantly, Last year at this time, Canadian dollar was 131 pennies to buy US dollar. Today, 137. That's adding about 2 cents a liter to the price of gasoline. That's a function of the fact that the world has very little interest in buying Canadian commodities and Canadian currency.
It's a tragedy. Before I let you go, Dan, when should I fill up?
Well, this weekend looks pretty good. I would say by Friday, you'll see prices drop a little bit more than they are now, and right across the country, an average decrease of about 2 cents a liter. So I'm waiting until Friday to fill up. Some can take advantage of this tomorrow if you're in Atlantic Canada. I've just given the information out there. Diesel down 2 cents, gasoline down 1.5. That's likely to be good for Thursday and Friday. Quebec, Ontario, it's pretty much the same, down about a penny. And of course, Western Canada, you've seen prices spike up. They're likely to drop about 2 cents a liter, with the lower mainland Vancouver staying in the 180, 183 range.
All right. Well, you heard it here first, everyone. Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Thanks so much for coming on, Dan. Really good to talk to you.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Andrew.
All right. Dan was always, back when I worked in talk radio, Dan was always like our favorite radio guest, because it was like everyone would call in and be like, wait, I need to know what's happening with gas prices. I need to get Dan on. So it's good to have him on this show as well. So we will turn from one thing that is costing you money to another. There are no shortage of them in this country, sadly. This one's a little bit wonky. So every now and then I do one of these topics where I'm kind of geeking out in a little way, because it's an issue that I've always been banging my head up against the wall that I can't get other people to care about. So today I'm hoping you'll join me in caring about this. Interprovincial trade. And if I haven't put you to sleep by that, do pay attention, because it is costing the Canadian economy about $200 billion a year, according to a new report from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. If you want to know how it relates to you, 6 years ago, there was a Supreme Court ruling that basically said you cannot take beer from Quebec to New Brunswick. So if you find cheap beer on one side of the border, you are not allowed to take it to your home in New Brunswick. That was the famous Comeau case, which is important because the Constitution is so very clear that there should not be any trade barriers domestically in the country. Yet we have so many of them, provinces that are treating their own economies as separate from others, and when we are all part of the same country here. But it is coming, like I said, at a cost. I want to welcome into the show to talk about this from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Director of Alberta and Interprovincial Affairs, Keyli Loeppky. Keyli, thanks for coming on today. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So what are these barriers and why are they there?
Yeah, well, good question for sure. There's lots of them, and they differ from province to province, but we're seeing barriers with regards to certain sectors. We're seeing barriers to the free movement of labor across the country. So if you're certified to work in one part of the country, that doesn't automatically mean you can start working in another part of the country. Services, it's not just easy to pick up your business and move to another part of the country and start operating your business in other areas. And with the flow of goods, we know that we can't get all different types of products from all provinces and territories into our home province. It's not as simple as straightforward as that. So lots of barriers exist across the country that are hurting Canadian businesses as well as consumers at a time when affordability is top of mind for many people.
It is. And, I'll ask in another way of where these costs come from. So that $200 billion a year, that's a pretty significant number. What's contributing to that?
So, there's quite a few examples, but really by eliminating internal trade barriers, we can improve Canada's productivity by allowing businesses to transport goods and services more easily, more cheaply, reduce delays caused by differing provincial regulations, have access to a wider consumer base, thereby increasing sales and efficiency. So all those things together add to up to that $200 billion. Things like increased competition, reduced red tape, enhanced innovation, all playing a role there.
So, for small and medium businesses, a lot of them, I'm assuming, would just say it's not worth the hassle and just close off to other provinces. The alcohol market is a great example of that. It's just so cumbersome and burdensome to deal with the regulations. A lot just don't even bother.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're hearing from our small business owners in many cases is actually easier to trade with the United States than it is to trade with your neighboring province or territory. So that's a really big indication that people need to pay attention to this issue, the political level especially. But alcohol is an issue that just is ridiculous. When we're making international headlines as a country because we can't move alcohol products freely within country, that's a serious problem. And there has been some some minor steps to fix that, but it's certainly not all the way there, and there's lots of room for improvement.
So what would need to happen to fix this? Because as I understand it, it isn't even just one single federal policy, say, that's causing all of these problems. It's every province that has its own pseudo-protectionist regime, basically.
Absolutely. So there's a role for each of the provinces to play when it comes down to this. How they're currently going at fixing these barriers is by going to a table called the RCT. The RCT was created under the Canada Free Trade Agreement, and it's basically a table where they come together, they identify barriers, and they sit and argue about whose regulations and rules are the best. So if you think about first aid kits, for example, prior to the RCT, first aid kits were different in each province. And if you had a business that operated across multiple provinces and territories, you had to make sure that your employee had access to that province's first aid kit. So if you think about a truck driver who required a first aid kit in their vehicle, they would have to have multiple different first aid kits to be in compliance. So what provinces did is they came to the table and argued about who had the best size of Band-Aids, and they came to an agreement on who had the best first aid kit, and now it's been decided 7 years later that we have one first aid kit across the country. Great, but that's way too slow to be removing some of these barriers. So what CFIB is recommending is something called mutual recognition. Instead of coming to an agreement, all sitting around the table fighting over Band-Aid sizes, let's just say you're an Alberta business and you want to use a BC first aid kit, no problem. We recognize that BC first aid kit is good enough for folks here in Alberta. We are not so different as a country. We do have unique differences in the different regions and whatnot, but we are not so different that first aid kits should be viewed so differently across the country. There's many examples of that.
All right. Well, definitely something we should keep an eye on. And yeah, call your MPP or your MLA or your MNA. I think those are all three. I'm in Ontario. It took me like years to learn, and they weren't all MPPs. But anyway, great topic, and hopefully we'll get some change on this in the future. Keyli Loeppky, thank you so much for coming on. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
All right. That is a fascinating, okay, maybe not fascinating topic, but it's an important topic. And that Comeau case was great because it illuminated exactly how absurd it is that a guy who lives in New Brunswick that, wants to go and buy some cheap beer in Quebec then gets pulled over and fined once he crosses the Quebec-New Brunswick border to get back home because, heaven forbid you carry beer across a provincial line as though it's, like the Berlin Wall or something. But anyway, that does it for us for today. We'll be back tomorrow with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show on True North. This is the Andrew Lawton Show. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to the Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.